Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. Jim Brett here of the New England Council, and we are pleased to welcome so many members of both the New England Council and the New England Canada Business Council for today's program. And before I hand it over to my counterpart at NECBC, John Sorensen, I just wanted to quickly remind you of a couple other events that the New England Council has planned in the next week or two. This Friday, we look forward to hearing from Maine Senator Angus King during the Capitol Hill report. Next week on April 20th, we'll host a virtual Politics and Eggs program featuring the conservative political commentator, Bill Kristol. On May 5th, we'll welcome back the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, who will be our guest, and she'll update all of our members on her work and a variety of issues that impact the region's economy. Speaking of the region, New England values and appreciates the important economic relationship that we have with our neighbors in the North and Canada. We've been fortunate to have the Consul General of Canada in New England as a council member for many, many, many years. And just a few months ago, our region welcomed a new Consul General, Rodger, to Boston. Of course, it's been a challenging time to take over that role when public health concerns make it so difficult to gather in person to meet the business leaders of New England. And so we are pleased to be partnering today with our friends at NECBC to provide an opportunity for all of you to meet and hear from the new Consul General, maybe hear about his background and maybe some of his priorities in his new role. I should also add that we'll be taking live questions during this program. So if at any point you have a question for our guest, please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom window to do so. For purposes of a very formal introduction, I am pleased to hand it over to my dear friend, the president of the New England Canada Business Council, the Honorable John Sorensen.
Honorable?
I gave you that title today, John.
Oh, yeah, that's brand new. I like it.
And now I take it away from you.
All right. Okay. Well, a big thank you to Jim Brett. Emily, thank you very much for your help coordinating all this. We really appreciate it. And a big thank you to the New England Council. New England Canada Business Council is excited to partner with Jim, who is world renowned, not just here in New England, world renowned, Jim. And we've been doing these type of events on an annual basis, and we hope to do more and more. So thank you again, Jim. Thank you again, the New England Council. And I'm real pleased to welcome Rodger Cuzner. He's the new Consul General for that relationship between Canada and New England. Now, a little bit about Rodger. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands this. We had a Habs guy in that seat before, and now we got a Leafs guy. So we've gone from terrible to worse. Okay, you know. But the Bruins are happy. We got Taylor Hall coming, so maybe maybe things will change here. So anyway, and the Leafs are having a heck of a year, and they made a great trade. So and Rodger will tell us all about it. A little bit about Rodger. Besides knowing Mike Savage, the mayor up in Halifax, who's a great friend of his and become a great friend of mine over the years, he was first elected to the House of Commons in November 2000. And a member of the Parliament for the Cape Breton, lovely Cape Breton up in Nova Scotia. Re-elected 5 subsequent elections before his recent retirement in October of 19. During his 19 years, Rodger served several roles, including Parliamentary Secretary to former Prime Minister Créchon, Chief Opposition Whip, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development. Early years in Parliament, Rodger focused on matters surrounding both veterans affairs, fisheries, and oceans. And again, I know I have some questions regarding some of the fishery and ocean related issues, so I hope all you do as well. And more recently, much of his attention was directed towards workforce development and national labor issues. As an elected official representing the beautiful and iconic northern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island, he worked with community and industry to build a mature, very mature tourism industry. For those who haven't been to Cape Breton, it is absolutely lovely. And so we are so pleased that we have somebody from that lovely area. Major investments in the infrastructure contributed to this growth, notably 2 of the top rated golf courses in the world, Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs, and I can agree, they are stunning. Prior to his appointment, Rodger worked in the private sector as a senior advisor for Rubicon Strategies in Ottawa, and he is not a Senators fan. He's a Leafs fan. Just want to make that sure. And he is a graduate of St. Francis Xavier University, grew up in Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. He's married to Len, and they currently live along the Mirror River in Cape Breton. They have 3 sons, Mitch, Scott, and Brad. And again, they have been very active hockey boys in their past. So, Rodger, are you ready? Are you ready to address New England Canada Business Council and the New England Council?
Ready to hit the ice here.
All right.
Don, thank you very much for the introduction. I very much appreciate it, and the invite to be here today. Just to let you know, the very first invitation I got after accepting the appointment was from the Business Council, and reading through it, and it said, "Please join us for a Christmas drink." And another guest would be Mike Savage. I said, "This is going to be a pretty good assignment if this is how it's starting off." And one of my first events was with your group. And so I've always appreciated our conversations and the insight that you've helped share with me as I get started. And of course, Jim, the work that is done at the council, and I follow as I try to, grow and learn and move into this position and provide some benefit for the people of Canada as I learn more about the position. The council has been a tremendous tool for me to learn. It's insightful, it's respectful, it's even when Jim's on his game, it's entertaining. So I very much appreciate it, and I look forward to the events that you had mentioned off the top. Looking forward and tuning in on them as well. Let me just say, my wife Lynn and I, we arrived in Boston second week in January, and it's pretty interesting. Any elected officials will know that you don't really have a lot of time to yourself. It's been an opportunity. We have Saturdays and Sundays off. I try to do a little bit of work on Sundays, but for the most part, we have Saturdays and Sundays off. So we've been getting out a little bit and social distancing and obeying all the public health protocols, but getting downtown. So a number of weeks back, we did get down to the Boston Commons. We walked around town, took in a lot of the sites. There's so many interesting historical artifact, nameplates and places, and the interpretive panels are incredible. Really enjoyed that. We stopped at Cheers for lunch, and we grew up watching Cheers. It's a pretty iconic place. So Lynn and I are sitting there enjoying a beverage, and I said to Lynn, I said, here we are in one of the great cities in North America, representing the people of Canada. Ever in your wildest dreams did you ever see us here? And she leaned over the table. She says, "Well, sorry, Rodger, but you're not in a lot of my wildest dreams." So a very strong woman. But that might upset some husbands, but Lynn and I have a great relationship. We trust each other. We enjoy each other. We love each other. Although the pandemic, it's become obvious that she loves me all the time, doesn't like me a lot of the times, but she does love me. But we have a great relationship. On most issues, we stand shoulder to shoulder. The odd time we stand nose to nose. And I think in terms of the relationship between our two countries, between Canada and the US, it's such a special relationship. And I know the people on this call understand that. And those far more articulate than myself have sort of expressed it. John F. Kennedy, when he spoke to the House of Commons back in 1963, summed it up. He said, geography makes us neighbors, history makes us friends, the economics makes us partners, and necessity makes us allies. And it's been an alliance that's been forged not through fear, but of hope. And I think that really typifies that relationship. But Ronald Reagan, 20 years later, Ronald Reagan, in speaking to the House of Commons in Canada, and there are two leaders that Canadians have a huge amount of respect for. But Reagan talked about it, and he went beyond that. He said, we are more than friends, we are more than neighbors, we are more than allies, we are kin. And, our two countries have built a relationship that is the envy of the world. There are no two countries anywhere in the world with a stronger relationship. And I think that it has served us so well over many, many generations. There are always going to be ups and downs. There are always going to be, bumps in the road, but the relationship is strong and true. And, we hope to certainly continue that. Over the last number of years, 3 or 4 years, there have been some hiccups, obviously. The past administration was comfortable dealing in sort of an atmosphere of spontaneity. There wasn't the degree of engagement that we've seen in past administrations. But make no mistake, there was still some good things got done. NAFTA was renegotiated. President Trump had said from the outset that he wanted to renegotiate the NAFTA deal. Barack Obama had said the same thing prior in his last term as president. Prime Minister Trudeau, when it was announced that the U.S. wanted to re-enter negotiations, Prime Minister Trudeau embraced the idea. He said, "This document is 25 years old. Is it serving Canadian businesses and Canadian workers and the other partners in this, U.S. and Mexico?" So we went into it. Robert Lighthizer, on behalf of the United States, my good friend Chrystia Freeland, who she's just a dynamo, 5'2" with her hands in the air, and she is tenacious, brilliant, just so capable. And then Jesus Siad was the negotiator for Mexico, and they went at it hard. It was an intense negotiation. It was a little give on either side, a little take on either side, but they got to a place that everybody could live with. And we should, not mistake that. Prior to our coming live here, we had talked about sometimes, the impasse. And if it's a piece of legislation being proposed by one party, the other party is not going to support it out of principle. This deal got bipartisan support. In the Congress, it was like 385 to 40. In the House of Commons, it got unanimous support, 280 to 28. So this was a deal that most elected officials felt would serve, the people that they represented. It would serve them well on both sides. So, again, because of that relationship that is built on peace and freedom and respect and cooperation, we've been able to move forward with that, which brings us to the new sheriff in town and President Biden. And I can absolutely, from our perspective, it's been very positive here in the early innings. The very first call that President Biden made was to another leader, was to Prime Minister Trudeau. The 2 hours, our ambassador to the U.S., Kristen Hillman, she said 2 hours after the inauguration, she had a meeting with White House officials with regard to issues with Canadians. And that's pretty incredible in terms of how governments move, knowing how governments move. We were really impressed with that. The first bilateral meeting that was held with a world leader although it was virtual, but it was between the president and the prime minister. And just to, give you some context, that they came to the table, this meeting, they were able to put together a roadmap. And they looked at everything, from trade to the environment to security issues to, the broad spectrum. And they've been able to come up with a roadmap. And what they said is, we do not want one-off meetings. We don't want to, just, okay, it's time for meeting. We want to meet every 2 weeks. And they've put a group in charge that are responsible for keeping score. And how are we moving on these specific issues? And like I say, it's around about 30, a spectrum of about 30 issues. And they want to see movement on these issues. So we see that as a positive start. There seems to be an environment that, they're promoting a thoughtful conversation, thoughtful action. And so anyway, we're from the Canadian perspective, we're excited, and we think that there's great potential. I thought I just sort of look at a couple of the bigger issues. And if anybody on the call, if we don't get to an issue that is near and dear to you, if we don't get an opportunity, because many of the issues we could use a whole call on. I know John knows that, and Jim knows that. But I'm going to touch on some that we felt that it would be worthwhile to focus on, and we're looking at a COVID and Buy America and maybe the border. If we get a chance, I don't know if we'll have much time after that, but if chance, we'll look at energy. But anyway, first, the COVID is obviously the elephant in the room, and I think there's probably two stories to the COVID situation. How we responded initially, how both countries responded initially, and where we are right now. And, I think when I look at the Canadian response early, I think Canadians took it pretty serious. There was very little politics involved in any of the decisions. For the most part, it was trying to follow the advice of the public health officials who were learning about this epidemic as we progressed. Everybody can think back to last March and April and the uncertainty and not knowing, about many aspects of the virus. We shut down pretty early. The provincial borders were shut down. I'm from Nova Scotia, and many of you know Premier Stephen McNeil. He and Nova Scotia's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Robert Strang, they did an incredible job, just absolutely incredible job. The Premier is a pretty stern guy. I know at St. FX, at the education course I took, the instructor told us, to teach kids, you don't smile till Christmas. You sort of have to establish yourself as the authoritative figure. Well, Premier McNeil smiled very little during the course of the pandemic, but he was consistent, and Nova Scotians bought in. We social distanced, we masked up, comparatively with Rhode Island, okay, which is a population of about the same size. They've had about 140,000 cases. We've had about 1,500. They've had 2,500 deaths. We've had about 65 deaths. So, but our economy is really close to reopening. There's very many aspects of our economy that are up and running and in good shape. I think now, but we by no means have a handle as a nation. We by no means have a great handle. We thought we had a boot on its throat coming into the end of last summer. Just yesterday, there were about 8,000 cases. So we're, as far as our cases, we're about on par right now with the United States, with cases growing. And so the variants have really, they haven't played fair. And if we thought that we had room to, maneuver. I think that reality has since been lost. So I think we started out pretty good. I'm concerned, and I think most Canadians are concerned as to where we are right now. And the biggest part is the other side of that coin is the vaccination component. And we have no domestic supply in Canada for the vaccine, for any vaccine. And that's a story in itself. But I think we're doing a pretty good job in Canada with getting the vaccinations out. The Prime Minister said every Canadian will be vaccinated by September. Most Canadians said, okay, that sounds like a reasonable period of time. Yeah, we'll live with that. But the true story is that the US has been knocking it out of the park with vaccines. It's not that we're doing terrible. It's that, you know, the vaccine production domestically here in the US and the uptake, getting shots in arms, you've really, the people around the globe are looking at this and saying that the Americans are getting it done. So you deserve credit for, you know, for certainly where you are now with the vaccine. And then I'll come back to how maybe that impacts on the border. So I'm going to sort of, I'll jump around here, but the Buy America is something that I do want to speak about. And the Buy America clause, you know, as much as we want to work together, you know, there's some concern around the Buy America, and we understand completely. You know, there's a clear desire on the part of the U.S. that U.S. procurement through the investment, the infrastructure, and what have you, we understand that you know, that should benefit American workers and support American jobs. You know, the complexity, and I'm sure everybody on the call today understands the complexity around this, because there's evidence and experience that says that's, you know, it's a simple view, but it's not necessarily true that, you know, just buying America goods only is good for all American workers and jobs. We know that we are so interconnected and interrelated. You know, they talk in the auto sector, they talk about the building of a car, and they refer to it as an automobile as an industrial tourist. A part that's made in one country goes to another country and is added to or you know, combined onto another part. There are tourists in that country. They buy a bad T-shirt, they come back to another country, back and forth. By the time that automobile hits the lot, it's got 8 bad T-shirts. It's crossed the border that many times. So, you know, it's a fully integrated system. So really, in terms of the auto sector alone, we should be looking at Team North America as opposed to, you know, Team North America versus Team Asia or Team Euro, as opposed to, you know, Team Canada and Team US. We are too fully integrated to, you know, to hide that up. So my sense around the Buy America, and I think that with the level of engagement that we have with the current administration, I think those issues will be allowed to percolate. But you know, if I have an ask for those in attendance today, is to make sure that we don't sort of proceed with anything that's going to result in unintended consequences that would hurt American businesses or American workers. The border. Let's look at the border, because one thing that the two leaders, that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump agreed on right out of the gate, was that to control the pandemic, we had to control the border. So you know, they knew it was the right decision to shut down the border. If I could, you have to give a shout out to the people on both sides of the border that kept the wheels turning, that kept the freight moving, that kept the supply chains filled, that allowed us to go on as safely and as, you know, whatever the new normal was. But those goods continued to cross the border. when we talk about trade, it's $2 billion a day worth of trade between the two countries. $1.5 million a minute across the border. It's an incredible flow of goods. And so throughout the pandemic, the people in those sectors kept those goods moving. So they deserve a great deal of credit. The current lockdown now is on until April 21st. And we are not aware as to, what's going to take place there. I know that discussions are taking place. I know that folks on both sides of the border, especially the border towns and the border states and those that the provinces are greatly impacted. There are discussions around what is a safe way back, as opposed to just blowing the doors open and saying, okay, we're okay. I would think, I'm fairly confident that there will be a vaccination certification, some kind of component of that related to having access. I would think that property owners from the United States that own property in Canada, or vice versa, they'd be looked at, and if vaccinated, there'd be a provision made there, as well as family reunification. I know that there are people on either side of the border that are just several miles from each other and haven't seen family members in 12 months. So those are issues, and those are discussions that are being had. And know that there is a great thirst on our side of, on the Canada side of the border as well, to get back to some degree of normalcy and get some opening on the border. Maybe I might leave it there. And how are we doing for time? And if we want to get into some questions, we could do that as well.
Sure. Again, big thank you to Rodger. Wonderful. Welcome. We're so happy you're with us. And yes, we do. We have lots and lots of questions. And so our esteemed Jim Brett, I believe you're going to kick us off with the first question, Jim.
Yeah. Consul General, one of the lessons we've learned here in the U.S. during this pandemic is the need to focus on strengthening the supply chains. It's been reported that Canada has also experienced the supply chain issue related to the vaccine rollout and is working to correct it. Do you think Canada will also focus on strengthening their supply chains beyond the pharmaceuticals?
Jim, I think there are lots of lessons to be learned in the wake of this pandemic. And when we look at PPE, when we look at pharmaceuticals, of course, those are going to be. We'll go back and we'll look at this, and I think that there are a lot of indications now that although there were lessons learned from SARS, there wasn't the proper actions may not have been pursued. But our concern with where we are as far as domestic production goes back to 1980, and Canada had a lab that was highly regarded around the world. It was privatized. There was a component of privatization at that time, and that was something that the government felt was important at the time. You can't look back and judge what the thinking was at that time. But anyway, and then that had been sold again by the private investor, and so the government of Canada sort of lost control of any reach of trying to designate what pharmaceutical companies should be doing and how they should be planning. And there was another initiative in the around 2010, 2012 that funding was pulled from an initiative in Quebec. We have certainly been caught flat-footed. I'll tell you one thing. One of the positive things that came out of this And I have to give my predecessor, Dave Allward, full credit for this, and his staff, Valerie Letraverse and Carolyn Caffrey at the consulate office, was Moderna, and bringing Moderna to the table. And that was a cold call made on behalf of our staff, and turned it over to David. And David said, "What can we help? What can we do to help you sort of bring your vaccine to market?" And some conversations were had, and so that was part of the success that you see with Moderna. I think a tip of the hat to the folks at the consul office. That was good. But no, you're absolutely right. Again, I think that our government has learned and will take appropriate action. We see the importance of the supply chain, with access to not just pharmaceuticals, but PPE and supply chain in general. I think that's a lesson to be learned.
John?
Let's go right back to the border, Roger, if we could. There's a lot of questions wrapped around that. There are two things here. Number one, you've got the federal government and the autonomy of the states, and then you've got the Canadian government and the autonomy of the provinces. And right now, there seems to be a lot of autonomy with the provinces, though we have seen Atlantic Canada most recently get together and have this Atlantic Canada travel policy among those provinces only, among those four, excuse me. So my question to you is, how is this going to work? Because of that autonomy, will the federal government and those provinces be aligned once that border opens up, or will only certain areas be allowed to cross and other areas not? For example, East Coast may be ahead on the vaccinations, and so maybe the East can cross, but not the West Coast. So how's this, in your thoughts, on how it's all going to work? Well, that was a loaded question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but being an international crossing, obviously it'll be the government of Canada that will have the final say, but they won't do it in isolation. There's been a very collaborative discussion going on. Crossing into some of the hot spots. I spoke with a good friend of mine, James Rodger, who's a former conservative member. We served in the House together, and he's in Washington now. And he said Alberta, which has the highest per capita infection rate in the country right now, but there are huge swaths of that province that there's one section there, 400 miles by 400 miles, and they've had 10 cases in that swath. Should they be treated the same as downtown Calgary, where there seems to be the more densely populated areas obviously have been there's been a far greater impact on the spread. So should they be treated differently? Within the Atlantic bubble, it was a pretty interesting occurrence where if you were okay in Newfoundland, you could travel to any of the other Atlantic provinces. There was a confidence there. Once there was a huge spike, a significant spike in New Brunswick, the other provinces shut it down, and Premier Blaine Higgs understood that completely. He knew that was necessary. Let me share this one with you as well. In Nova Scotia, just before Christmas, we had an uptick, and I think there are maybe 15 or 19 cases, maybe 20 cases. No deaths arose from it, but it was the Restaurant Association of Nova Scotia that took the initiative and said, we are going to shut down for a 2-week period, to allow the provinces. So there was no in-restaurant dining during that period of time. That was an initiative that came from the private sector, and that was positive. So the provinces, I crossed the border. I had to take Lynn back to Nova Scotia for some medical stuff back 3 weeks ago. We crossed the border. We were given 2 kits. We had to do a test online with a nurse, do the test. Once we arrived home, we had to present them with a plan to quarantine. We had to There were people who showed up at our home. There was a police officer one day. I thought it was for something else, but anyway, it was okay. It was just about the COVID. And there was a compliance official as well that came in on another day. We had to check in every day, both provincially and federally. So they're taking it fairly serious. But again, this will be whatever initiatives are taken. They'll be science-based, they'll be data-based, and there'll be caveats in it that will, there'll be an emergency brake as well. That if we are able to proceed with family reunification, if we are able to proceed with landowners crossing, if we see that there's a spike in the wake of that, then there'll be an emergency brake provision. But I'll close on this one, just on the border. The Prime Minister came forward with fairly stringent regulations just prior to spring break. And obviously, he did that as a deterrent to, those that wanted to go south on spring break and then return to Canada. And so I think it was wise on his part as we get past that spring break period. And, I think the thinking changes. But then again, with the spike in central Canada, we're looking at this, and with the advent of the variations, if we spoke 2 weeks ago, I'd probably have a different view than I do today. That doesn't really tell you a whole lot, does it, John?
Well, it's tough, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you get it, but the Canadian, there's another question wrapped around the border. There's a lot of questions on border here, but some of the Canadians have been able to come to the United States to get vaccinated, especially in those areas where 16 and older can get vaccinated. So we're seeing that, but yet an American with a negative test can't cross the border to see family, friends, or property. I know people that own homes in Canada that cannot access those homes and that have for over a year. So again, talk a little bit about how does that get resolved and how much longer are we going to deal with that, because it doesn't seem to be reciprocal right now.
But the person that the Canadian that came down to the States and got their vaccination, if they were crossing back again, they would have to comply with the rules on the border now, and they would have to, they would have to go back and quarantine and put the 2 tests in, the tests the day of. We got tested before we left Wellesley, and we presented those tests at the Canadian border. But then we had to do 2 more tests while we were there on day 1 and day 10. So they would have to comply. But your points are well taken, and I think you walk before you can run. I think if we look at family reunification and landowners on both sides, start with something that's manageable like that. Look at it and then study. But make no mistake. I mean, in your introduction, and a very kind introduction, John, but you had talked about Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs, 2 incredible golf courses. 50% of their clientele are U.S. golfers. We've had Larry David and Warren Buffett and Jerry Seinfeld, and all these guys have come down and golfed at Cabot Cliffs, Cabot Links. Our caddies love being tipped in the Ben Franklins. They love that. But the border being shut down has just been it's really been harmful and really kicked the guts. Luckily, we did have that Atlantic bubble, and we were able to sustain some type of operation. But make no mistake, we're feeling it, especially in the tourism sector. We're feeling it. But families and landowners, I think, they should be the first groups looked at.
Yeah, and we did have a question on tourism. How does it survive with, again, the borders closed and we're up against another summer now. So, and you just addressed it. It's difficult. So.
Oh yeah. No, it's people want to get on the move, and people But I've been impressed since we've come to Wellesley. People are very respectful, very, everywhere you go, people are masked and socially distanced. And, if you're out for a walk in the morning, people will stay 6 feet apart, or they may have their mask down as they approach you. They put it back up again. You're seeing these things. So we feel safe and confident here in Wellesley.
So let's talk a little bit about trade, because again, USMCA, but there's obviously some caveats. I think a lot of folks are very, very happy with USMCA, as you discussed earlier in your presentation. One of the questions, though, is about lumber, right? And that continues to be a lingering issue. And with the housing stats right now through the roof, the cost of lumber's skyrocketing. How do we resolve these issues with softwoods and lumber back and forth between the United States and Canada?
Well, first of all, when you mentioned trade, I thought you were going to talk about Foligno going to the Leafs this year.
Oh, that's true.
Will guarantee us Stanley Cup. But softwood lumber has been an ongoing issue forever. For 125 years, softwood lumber, and it's one of those issues that it's like when you have a pebble in your shoe in the summer, and you sort of got to wiggle it around and get it between your two big toes there. So you still know it's there and it's an irritant, but we can work with this sort of thing. And in Canada, the different parts of the country deal with it. They have different business models, and some use private woodlots, and some use crown land, and that's always been contentious with with the U.S. It's been to court numerous times over the World Court, numerous times over the generations, and I must say that Canada has always fared really well in those particular rulings. Currently, the cost of building supplies on both sides of the border have gone up incredibly. The cost of lumber has gone up significantly. We lost as we move away from printed newspapers. I've got three, as you mentioned, I got three adult sons. I've never seen them hold up a newspaper. Maybe if their picture might have been on the sports page, they might have taken a look at it over their mother's shoulder or something. But so as we lose as that realization comes to the paper industry, we thought for sure. I know back in Nova Scotia, we thought for sure we lost a mill in Pictou County, and we thought that was going to really decimate our woodlot owners and the forestry sector. But with the price of lumber, I mean, holy smokes, it's it's just taken off. I'm sure that those discussions on the softwood lumber will continue to be ongoing. They'll find a spot that works best for both. I know that the sort of surprise tariffs that were thrown at the softwood lumber back just probably about 4 years ago, I think. We hadn't expected it, and it drove the price of an average home in the United States. It drove it up by about $8,000 per unit.
Wow.
And so we got to be careful about the tariffs. Like I say, it's the unintended consequences, I think, that we have to be cautious of and cognizant of. And so it may solve one problem, but if it creates 3 or 4 other problems downstream. We saw the same thing with the steel and aluminum tariffs. Once we got to a spot that we said, it's in everybody's best interest to look at it in a North American view, in a North American vision. I think we're both better served on both sides of the border.
So again, back to trade and some of the issues that we're dealing with. You and I talked earlier in the week about the right whale issue and the fisheries and the lobster industry's front page of the Globe about the lobstermen are For example, I live close to Gloucester, and traps are up and people aren't out lobstering, and there's questions about how many lines you can have. I mean, there are a myriad of issues that are going on regarding the right whale. Talk a little bit about that, because it really affects New England and New England fisheries.
Yeah, it affects fisheries on both sides as well, very much. And the seafood, fish and seafood sector is a very mature industry. My father-in-law, Cliff Hopkins, he had 4 fish plants in Cape Breton and Newfoundland, and he sold fish down here to Nagel Brothers in Boston for 65 years. His family business did, and as well, he had a broker in Maine that he worked with. So, his early years in business were up and down the airline highway in Maine. But the right whale sector, I was aware of it and followed it as a member of Parliament. And I've been impressed with the fishers in Canada, and I'm just learning more about the fishery in the States. They're completely different fisheries. But the fish harvesters in Canada have now taken a far more, today's fisherman, fisher person, far more respectful of the science, far more respectful of the broader business implications of the science and their actions. So Dominique Leblanc, who many of you would know, was Minister of Fisheries. And when we had the initial concerns around the right whale, he and the Minister of Transport, they took initiatives. They really slowed down traffic speeds during particular times through the Gulf and in the Bay of Fundy. They had huge exclusion zones, no fishing, in certain areas that had right whale sightings. The DFO they've got daily flights, and they're using drones for spotting. They're taking steps that are important. The folks, but that's because the fishermen understand the broader picture. Building equity in their enterprise is essential. And if you lose access to the U.S. market, you blow a lot of equity. So they're very conscious of that. The U.S. fishers, they've taken some very positive steps with regard to ghost gear and trying to identify ghost gear and get ghost gear out of the environment. Some positive things there. But what I'm seeing, in my initial response, I had a great conversation with Commissioner Keeler 2 weeks back, and we were like-minded on this. There still seems to be the finger pointing sort of going on, and the Canadians are saying, well, it's not our fault, that's not our gear, it's your gear. And we just lost Cottontail, and the Americans believe that it's Canadian gear, and we believe our evidence shows it's their gear. Regardless, we lost a right whale because of gear. Why the two entities? Why there's no table to sit down and say, what are best practices? How can we approach this issue for the benefit of all fishers on both sides of the border? And that's missing. Maybe if we can make enough noise to allow that to happen, we can get everybody at the table. Honest to God, and that's probably overused sometimes. But in this situation here, if we can develop best practices, I think we'll all be better served. But it's an issue, and we'll continue to monitor the issue. But know the Canadians, DFO, Minister of Transportation, they take the issue very serious, and we'll do all we can. But hopefully we can advance it into a position where everybody is sitting down and working to find a better solution.
Great. Cannabis, that's been a very big topic on the news and the trade. CNBC seems to have something about cannabis every day with stock and value. But what we've seen is a federal legislation, that's obviously deployed cannabis, and initial focus obviously on the medical side, the medical treatment, and a lot of success with folks that are 65 years and older. Here, it's obviously scattered by state, and it's there's still the struggle between medical and recreation. What can Canada's, from a lessons learned perspective, what can Canada communicate to us, or how can you help us and help the states and help the federal government kind of deploy the cannabis industry and the medical marijuana and recreation use? What are your thoughts there?
I really believe, that it's been a success story in Canada. I truly believe it's been a success story. And I was of the ilk early on that when we looked at how to address it, do we just decriminalize it or legalize it? And I thought first decriminalization would have been the way to go. But still, you're not getting control of who manufactures it, who handles it, who gets it to the public. So, by legalization, it's funny, one of the leading critics against our government at the time, and that was before I was a public servant, so I can talk in retrospect and sort of political. But one of the comments from the leaders on the other side was, cannabis is the currency of organized crime. And I thought to myself, yeah, it is. It's the currency of organized crime. So let's take it out of the hands of organized crime. And, would you sooner be buying cannabis off a bureaucrat or off a gangster? Is pretty much what it came down to. Now, when you go into a store, now it's up to the provinces to deal with it as they may. And again, I think most provinces have done a pretty good job of it. But when you go into a store, you can determine, the level of THC, the level of CBD, whatever it is you're looking for, you can buy it there. It's a pretty civilized way to get an intoxicant. But make no mistake, it's still an intoxicant. I think we benefited from some of the early stuff that was going on in Colorado, and we learned from that, and we took some measures around that. There was actually a decrease in the underage usage in Colorado from like 52% to 48% once they legalized it. I guess it lost a little bit of the cachet of something that's legal or not legal, but it's gone extremely well. It provides revenues for governments. The folks, there hasn't been a huge spike in people that are using cannabis. It's just those that used to, that traditionally smoked. They're smoking now, but they're able to go to a government outlet or private in some cases and purchase it. So it's been really civilized, and we had some concerns around the impaired driving, because there's a breathalyzer for alcohol, and there wasn't anything for cannabis, and there were some concerns around that from the outset. But those folks are driving after smoking a bomb now, and they're getting out and driving now. So whether it's legal or not, but there's been some work done, and they think they may have some ways to get into measurement and adjudication on whether or not somebody is stoned. But anyway, it's something that we think has gone incredibly well, and the crime rates and that haven't spiked or anything. It's like it's gone well.
Hey, John, can I just follow up on that?
Please, Jim.
New England, we have 6 states. I think 3 have already passed the recreation and the marijuana, the other 3 medical. But the big problem we have here, not only in the states but in the country, is that the federal government has prohibited this drug. So there's a conflict between states and the federal government, which has prohibited banks from working with the cannabis shops and taking them as a depositor. And there's a piece of legislation in Washington. We're working very hard with the delegation, Safe Banking Act, to make it allow that the banks can work with all of these cannabis shops as an account. because many of these cannabis shops have an awful lot of cash, and they're looking to be able to deposit in a bank, but because of the federal statute, they are prohibited. So what is it like in Canada? That obviously the cannabis shops are working very well with the banks, and the banks are working well with them.
Absolutely. It seems to be one of the benefits of the legalization, to bring these operations above board, and the health and safety and security measures around these are specific. But we want to take the whole issue of cannabis out of the realm of a justice issue and present it as a public health issue. There were kids that were dying because they were smoking pot that was laced with fentanyl. There were kids, PCB, whatever, the gangs that were controlling the product at the time, they would do whatever they wanted to with that. Now that comes from a controlled site into a controlled transporter, into a controlled distributor. And so, the chance of being sprayed or doctored in any way is far less so. And that's, I would think that the discussion will be had, if not now, if this government goes again, if they're fortunate enough to be reelected again, they will probably look at, it's all often been talked about, but the legalization of, many drugs, and again, taking it out of the justice system, making it a public health issue. And if that happens, I think they can look back to the gateway drug, the gateway drug stuff, and they throw that one out a lot of times. The gateway drug is when Jim goes to buy a couple of joints off his pusher, and the pusher says, well, I don't have any pot today, but I've got a couple of lines of Coke. And, well, I've never tried Coke. Well, listen here, take this and try a couple lines of Coke. And so away you go. And next thing, geez, that's not bad. I don't know if there's no real life experience in that. I'm not implying that, Jim, that there's any real life experience in that, but that's how.
In my wildest dreams, I wouldn't be doing that.
But that's how we saw the gateway. That's where we saw the gateway, and you're not getting that from when the federal government and the provincial governments have their hand in it. We think that chance is decreased considerably.
Well, we have many more questions. We have questions that, can you believe it, Jim? We didn't ask any questions about energy, even though we have a list of 2 or 3 of them, but we're out of time. So unless we don't go over, do we, Jim?
No, unless you have one quick energy question.
Okay.
You want to ask one quick energy?
Sure, please.
No, do you have
Oh,
one
I can. Yeah, I've got plenty.
Just
So
do one.
yeah.
And then
Well, there are a couple. Number one, obviously, obviously New England Clean Energy Connect transmission line. It did receive its president's certificate. It's moving forward. U.S. Army, et cetera, under construction. But there has been some recent lack of support, if you will, and they're trying to possibly get another docket for the voters, as you know, and get it at the voting booth next November. Your thoughts on that? We believe here in Massachusetts, specifically Massachusetts, obviously it's going to help us meet our carbon goals and objectives. Your thoughts on where we are there and on how things look going forward?
Well, you're absolutely right that I'm very much impressed with overall in New England, the aggressive goals that you've set, the environmental goals that you've set, and some of the stuff that's going on in Rhode Island and, with the offshore wind stuff is spectacular. But you can't just flick the switch and we're there. This is time, and we have the benefit of having access. New England states have the benefit of having access to clean, sustainable energy coming out of Quebec, and several states have recognized that and are in partnership and utilize energy created from Hydro-Quebec. This project itself, as you said, it received the presidential approval. There's a process that is being followed now. We certainly don't want to get involved. Don't believe we should be involved domestically in that discussion. But from a personal vantage point and from our perspective, we think it's if this does not go ahead, we think it's a missed opportunity. We think it can backstop the grid here in New England as you move towards your very ambitious and very aggressive goals. But we think it's a great opportunity missed if this project doesn't go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
Well, it's great. Well done, John. You have a future career as a moderator. You moved it along very, very well. So I just want to say thank you to John and to all his members. And welcome, Rodger, to New England. We hope to see you sooner rather than later in person. And we have many of our events at the Hampshire House. So when you mentioned, Cheers, that's one of our venues that we're fortunate to have as a member of the New England Council. So we'll be welcoming you to many of those events in the future. But all in all, we thank you for giving us a little perspective on who you are, your priorities, and what to look forward in the future. But as I said earlier, we are great neighbors, and we want to continue that neighborly care for each other. And we look forward to working with you and your wonderful staff. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Cheer on the Red Sox. I know you're not a Bruins fan, but hey, no one's perfect. But at least you can cheer on the Celtics and the Red Sox, I hope, in the future here. So all in all, we thank you, and stay safe and healthy in Wellesley. Boy, pretty good.
Doing okay.
Not a bad life. Not a bad life. So I thank you again, and thank all the members of that John was kind enough to include into our discussion here today. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity, folks.